You're listening to Story Struck. I'm Rachel, an editor and writing coach.
And I'm Nino, a ghostwriter and book coach. Welcome to our curious community where we dive into everything books and writing.
Now, let's get into the episode.
Hey, thank you so much for coming on, Denise. So for our listeners, we have the wonderful Denise Madre, who is an editor. She is a storyteller. She is a sensitivity reader extraordinaire, and so many other things. She has an amazing TikTok platform, which is where I discovered her. Denise, thank you so much for coming on. Would you like to introduce yourself more than the word vomit I just did?
Well, your word vomit is just as good as my word vomit, so let's just vomit together. I am Denise Madre, owner of Prose Without Thorns. It's an editing firm dedicated to helping writers uncover their best work. And I do that through a variety of different kinds of editing. Most recently, sensitivity editing has kind of broken out as its own thing because I always do that as part and parcel of the editing process. But I realized that a lot of people need it separately from other editing. I'm a wordsmith, word geek, as evidenced by my shirt, which I just got the other day. I had one before, but I outgrew it, so I was glad to get a new one. So I just like chopping it up about writing and storytelling and kind of getting into it from multiple angles, because not all of us write the same way, not all of us process information the same way, and we don't all agree on what matters. But I think even having the discussion sometimes can illuminate some things and empower people to just write better from the start. Not that I would like to do less work because that's my livelihood, but as an editor, it makes me really happy when writers start writing better drafts from the outset because they understand the process more, because all that does is lead to better stories. And as a reader, that's great for me too.
Definitely, and that's going to increase their confidence as well as they're going into those drafts and sharing early.
Yes.
So like, I'm a nonfiction ghostwriter transitioning into fiction developmental editing. And I have found like my nonfiction clients weren't quite as concerned, but I had like a gentleman recently and I was going to do a sample edit for him. And he freaked out that I wanted to see a sample of his work.
Yes.
And I'm like, sir, how am I supposed to do anything if you won't even share it with me? But he was so scared. I'm like, you're at the stage. So I think the work that you're doing, you're just making those writers more and more confident for those future times that they're writing to be able to say, okay, I'm feeling better about this. It's a rougher draft, but it's better than what I did a year ago or 2 years ago. Yeah. And that is just helping them to produce the best work possible and giving them that confidence to tell their stories.
And it kind of makes sense though, right? Because writing is a solitary discipline. I mean, you do most of it by yourself. Even if you're co-writing with someone, there is a part of it that's just you. And you spend weeks or months or even years with this baby on your own. And then there's a point where you realize, oh, I have to let other people meet my baby. And it's terrifying because either it's better than you thought it was, which rarely happens, or it's worse than you thought it was. And because you're so attached to it, you didn't see what the editor saw. And that's another reason why I love being able to talk about writing so much on TikTok, because the worst part for me, and thankfully this doesn't happen very often with my clients, but sometimes people are, and I'll even talk about my own story. When I self-published my own novel about 10 years ago, I was shocked by the feedback I got. Now, this was back when I was only editing nonfiction, so I was pretty new to fiction. And I didn't understand the rejection I got from the publisher. And it was there were two friends of mine. Remember Skype when you used to SMS and you could stay on all night?
Yeah.
These two friends of mine, one in Ohio and one in Canada, sat on Skype SMS with me for, I kid you not, 3 hours, just talking back and forth about my book. And they illuminated things that were right in front of me, but they did so in a way where they were like, this is your book. You can change it. I know it feels like, well, this is what this character has to do. It's not. You can change it. It's like Chandler when he was talking about the fact that he doesn't cry, and Joey's like, you didn't cry when Bambi's mother died. And Chandler's like, yeah, it was really sad when the guy stopped drawing the deer. I mean, you don't think about animation that way, but really you can just rub it out and draw something else. And with writing, even though your characters have agency and personality and they feel sentient, you can actually change what they do. And it's this paradox where they are their own entity, but I also decide who they are and what they do. And if you can learn to understand both sides of that, then you won't fear getting that feedback. You actually want to know, is this working or is this not? And to your point, Rachel, the earlier in the process you can find that out, the better off you are. Because who wants to sit with a book for 2 years in isolation, send it to an editor and get it back, and now you're so crushed you can't even redraft it, which is so sad. So I think it's empowering and important for writers to understand that, yes, you're going to have to revise, but that's normal. It's okay. You want to revise it because look at what you've done so far. Doing it again will only make it better.
Yeah, and like the thing too is like, so having like, so Rachel's one of my best friends, she's an editor, and so me writing my novel, I'm like, okay, this is the shittiest of shitty first drafts, but I need your opinion. Here you go. Can you read these chapters for me? And she's able to give me that feedback, right? You have your friends there who are like, so this is what we received. Having that writing community, so vital, because like you said, it's a solitary experience. And I think, you know, speaking of your TikTok, one of the things, you know, as a writer, it's so solitary, and like we can do a bunch of research into our characters, but there's certain levels that we just can't quite understand, right? We can't quite contextualize because it's so outside of our experience, right? And see, I think a lot with men who are writing female characters, right? It's
men writing women is so funny when you see it on, oh my gosh, it's one of my favorite things. It's just so funny because God bless them, they're so serious, and that was the published version.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like, what's in the trash heap? Do we want to know? Should you be on a list somewhere? You should probably be on a couch somewhere talking about what's going on in there. It's just so bad. It's so bad, but so funny.
Yeah, but right, like, so, but like, you don't know what you don't know sometimes.
You don't.
You know? Granted, there are plenty of men who have women in their life that they can say like, is this actual, like, your experience? Is this how you feel? Like, they, you know, you have to talk to the people who are so far outside of your realm. And so, you know, it's important, just like, you know, you were saying earlier, like, if you're not an electrical engineer, you need to talk to an electrical engineer to find out, like, what is it, you know. Sure, you could read a book on electrical engineering, but you know, I know both me and Rachel come from the medical field, and so, you know, like, what we learn in school versus what we learn in real life are very different things. So talking to those people to get like some real life information is so important. And so for your TikTok is so helpful, I think, particularly for white writers who are trying to write Black characters and do it in a way that feels real, and it's not giving, this is a white lady writing a token Black woman, you know, similar to how this is a man writing some just like random two-dimensional woman in his book, you know. So there's, I mean, there's so much on your TikTok that I've learned and stuff.
I'm so good. I think it's one of those things.
Some of the key components you would say to a new writer who is writing, has a major character of color in their book, how they can go about learning that experience, so that way that is a fully fleshed out human character and not just a token.
Well, I would start there with the fact that, let's just think about what we're saying. You've never written a character of color, and you've decided to start with a main character. As I said in another video, if you've never baked before, you're not going to start with a croquembouche. If you've never sewn before, you're not going to start with your best friend's wedding gown. You're going to bake a sleeve of cookies you got from the market, you know, chop them up, put them in the oven and hope for the best. You're going to sew those little cute little creatures, or you'll sew a pot holder. So I understand the energy and the impetus for saying, I want to write a character of color and go, dang it, I'm going to write a main character. It's noble. It's also foolish because you're setting yourself up for failure, not because you're white and clueless, but because there's so much you don't know. And then this character becomes your entrance into this experience of writing a person, even though they're a character, trying to encapsulate a sliver of someone else's experience and doing it in a way where they are not only doing that, they're also carrying your plot. So while they're trying to be this Black woman you've never written before, they're also trying to figure out who is killing all of these pregnant mothers in their small town. So this character is doing far more work than they need to. So the first thing I would say is do not make this character a main character if you've never done it before, because you're just putting too much pressure on yourself. You need to start, I don't want to say slower, but you need to start with something with lower stakes. So for example, in one of my TikToks, I say, let's say you're writing a domestic thriller and you're thinking of making this Black woman the lead detective. Do not do that. It's too much pressure because she's carrying the story. Instead, let the next door neighbor be a Black woman. Now, she can't just be described as a Black woman and we never see her again. She needs to interact with the main character, but that can take different forms. For example, he can say to himself, oh Lord, there's Barbara. If I see Barbara, then I know I'm at least 15 minutes late. Okay, so now we know that they know each other's schedules well enough. Then he comes home from work another day and Barbara's kids are running around on the lawn. There's balloons and streamers and stuff. And she says, are you working again on a Saturday? Why don't you come over and get a piece of cake? And he says, I'll come later. I got work to do. And she says, you're working too hard. Okay, interaction again. Now, there's another way to incorporate her into the plot in a minor way, but in a way that indicates she's not just the token Black lady for diversity's sake. If she says to him one morning, you were out pretty late rummaging through those cans. I hope you found what you were looking for. And he goes, what do you mean? Well, I saw you through the window last night while I was washing dishes. You were rummaging through the trash cans in your backyard, weren't you? And he's thinking to himself, I wasn't home last night. So now he knows someone's been digging around in my trash. Now, does her being Black have anything to do with any of that? No. But representation matters because people are different. So it's not that she should only come to him because someone bullied her kid in their private school for being Black. It's that Black people exist in this world with this detective. And I think starting there or something like that is preferable, because when you make the character the main character, it's just too much pressure. And it starts you from a place of insecurity, which doesn't serve you and it doesn't serve your reader. So that's the first thing. Do not start with the main character. The second thing, which kind of comes in when you are trying to write a main character or someone of greater import, so not just the next door neighbor to the detective, maybe their paramour, for example. There's a paradox in writing about race when you are writing about a race that is not your own. Their race is not all that they are. So it should not be the end all be all of every conversation or interaction they're in. But it does matter. I give an example in one of my videos about, let's say the main character and his girlfriend who's Black, they're at a restaurant and they're having a wonderful time. It's been months since they've seen each other, but it started to rain. He's like, let's make a run for it. She's like, no, we're not. And you would know that if you understood that Black women don't play about their hair. Now, are there Black women in the world who would just run out and just wash and go? I know a few, absolutely. But a Black woman reading that book, if she said, you go get the car and pop into the CVS down the street and get me an umbrella and I will be waiting under this awning, we would read that and go, okay, they understand that that's something with us that we don't like getting our hair wet. You know, it's not like a gizmo thing. It's just that we're very protective of our hair. And so that's the paradox, that her being Black doesn't define her role in the story, but it may impact minor interactions that if you don't understand Black culture, you're going to miss that. Now, no one's going to DNF your book because your main character's girlfriend ran out and got her hair wet. But it is one of those things that has you kind of going, they didn't understand. Yeah. They didn't do research. And so when you were talking, Lauren, earlier about the importance of community, this is why community matters. Because when you're in these writing groups, and Facebook can be a cesspool at times, let's be honest, but the writing groups on Facebook, there's so many people in there who will just post something like, hey, I'm writing a scene like about electrical engineering. Does anybody know anybody? And boom. Believe it or not, it might be a little awkward to kind of say, hey, I'm writing a Black woman in my story, and I just want to know, is there something that I should avoid? That's a question I get a lot. And that's why I always recommend a sensitivity reader, because it's impossible in however many characters, even though TikTok's been very generous with the characters, and sometimes I get comments that are this long and I'm just like, And what I really want to say is, respectfully, you need a sensitivity read, because I can't possibly answer every question about your book. Because yes, you may ask me this and I may say, oh yeah, that sounds fine. Then you write your book, 99.9% of which I have not read, and someone sends you a review and you're like, well, that Black lady on TikTok said this was okay. Well, I said that was okay, but I don't know what else is in your book. And so even with all the research, like you were saying, Lauren, you do need somebody else's experience. And the best way to get that is with a sensitivity read.
So that just makes me feel really good, because my character is kind of a supporting character, and this is giving me ideas of how to have that genuine interaction. So I'm reading a cozy mystery, and she's going to own a mobile tea van, and she reads tea leaves. So it's just fun. It's, you know, cute, and lots of paranormal aspects. At what point in the process would you suggest someone gets a sensitivity reader, and how would you suggest that they find a sensitivity reader?
Well, I am one, so you found me if you found this podcast. But I also suggest those Facebook groups I mentioned. There are several that are, some are just writers. If you look at the description, some of them will say writers, editors, publishers, and in that kind of group, you may find one. If you have friends who are writers, ask them, do they know any editors who might know someone who might know someone? Respectfully, if you have, and let's also just stipulate, this doesn't just go for characters of color, it's for anyone in any marginalized group as well. So this would go for if you're writing an autistic character, if you're writing a disabled character, if you're writing someone with an autoimmune disease. These are things that you have to be sensitive about. If you have a friend in that category or in that group, they may not feel comfortable, but they may know someone. So really, the best thing, once you're starting your writing process and you know you have a character representing a certain group in your book, you should start the process then. When you need one, I actually think it's best to wait until you have a solid draft. Because even when someone says, well, I want to send you my outline in my first 6 chapters, it's like, well, your first 6 chapters might be fine. But then chapter 7 is where the real work begins. And there may be something in chapter 13 that you aren't even aware is a thing. Like I was reading a book casually from a writer that I really like. And there was a throwaway line. It was a young adult romance. These 2 characters were going to the pier to hang out. And the narration just said there was some raunchy hip hop playing on the radio. Now, that's a throwaway line. It's not offensive. Not offensive, but it's something. Yeah. So I sent the author a private message and I just said, hey, this throwaway line about raunchy hip hop. Yes, hip hop can be raunchy, but hip hop can also be thoughtful and playful and romantic. Pop music and heavy metal and rock music can also be raunchy. So the choice to use raunchy hip hop in a story where there are no other references to Black people or Black culture creates something that isn't necessarily positive. Now, I'm not making any assumptions about why this is in there. I kind of think you didn't think about it. She hired me to be one of her editors for her next several books. Now, the example is not about me getting a job. It's about how no one would think, if they're writing or asking a question on TikTok, how should I describe the rap music in this? You know what I mean? It's too small a thing for someone to notice, but a sensitivity editor would catch it. And that's why getting a sensitivity editor or reader, and the only difference really is that the reader, if I'm sensitivity reading your book, I'm going to give you feedback for you to do something with it. If I'm editing the book, I'm going to make the changes for you, because you're like, listen, respectfully, this is out of my depth. This character has a lot of lines and I don't want to mess up. So would you mind just editing their part? And I've done a few of those as well. But I think doing it at the end of the first draft is better than doing it too early, because you just don't have enough information. I did one for someone. It was only their first chapter, was less than 2,000 words, and it was wonderfully written. But I don't know what's to come later. So she said, I just wanted to know if I was at least starting on a good track, and I'll see you at the end, and we're going to do it again when she finishes her book. But I think starting it afterwards, when you have a full draft, is really the best way for an editor to see exactly what you've actually written.
I appreciate you explaining that difference between like the reader and editor, and kind of what type of feedback they'll get. And also saying that this extends beyond, you know, color and things like that.
Oh,
I have a
yes.
background in psychology. And so when you mentioned,
Yes.
you know, neurodivergent and things like that, like I work with children with autism, and it bugs the crap out of me when you just see the stereotypical like savant,
Right.
like
You
all this
just
stuff.
see
And
the
my husband will be
children.
like, "Oh yeah, babe, did you see this?" I'm like, breathe for a second. And I'm like, babe, no, like, just
I have
no.
3 autistic children. They are now 15, 18, and 26.
Yeah.
And it burns my butter
Mm-hmm.
how so many depictions, and I'm not going to call the name of the show because it's not fair, but there was a show on that was very popular, and
Oh,
everybody
I
and their
know what
mama
you mean. Mm-hmm.
inboxed me and was like, "Are you watching this show?" I said, "No.
No.
I said, "He's probably really good at what he does," which is the whole premise.
Yeah.
I said, "But it's a spectrum for a reason." And this depiction, valid though it may be, is also incredibly limiting to the rest on the spectrum. And that's another thing about writing characters from marginalized groups. It is impossible for any one character, like the Black character in your book, Lauren, it's impossible for her to represent all of Black womankind. It's impossible. So it's not about that. It's just about her being authentically who she is, which is why I said before in another video that you don't want to start with race. You may say to yourself, she's a Black woman, but as you're constructing her, who she is, what she values, what she fears, what she wants, what she's willing to do, what she's not willing to do, that has nothing to do with her race. But there are times when her identity as a Black woman is going to show up in the book in subtle and maybe not so subtle ways. So it's that there's a paradox in writing a character of a different race than you that is always with you as you're working. And as long as you have that consciousness, I think even your draft, if it's awkward or what have you, it's better to just get it out, because then you'll know what you're dealing with.
And that's with I think such an important thing about having a sensitivity reader, is that those are things that your reader may not know that that's the reason they're a little soured to your work.
Correct.
Because I think about, you know, like Rachel and I talk about character psychology and things all the time. And so we can parse out those things whenever we're reading a book. Like, what was it about this specific character that soured it for us and stuff.
Yes.
But the average person just knows if they like it or they didn't.
Yes.
And typically when they don't like something, they don't always know, well, I don't know why this movie didn't work or why this book didn't work. It fell short. But why? So the sensitivity reader or the sensitivity editor can help you to see those things that might have a character or a reader sour to your work. And
the truth is, it's not even necessarily, and this just needs to be said, if you are a white writer whose audience is primarily white, your readers may not even notice it. But and not even if you're white, if you're a neurodivergent writer or a neurotypical writer, your neurotypical readers may not notice it. But an autistic person picking up your book may just be like, huh. And it's not a majority enough of your audience where it would be a thing you'd even notice, but it's there. And that's the thing about ignorance. It is so, and ignorance simply meaning a lack of information and insight. It's not an insult. We're all ignorant about something. If I were writing a book about, I like to use the electrical engineer example, I would have to do a ton of research. If I were writing as a white man, would I need to do some research? The thing that makes that so dicey is that as a Black woman, I've been inundated with the lies of white men my entire life because it's everywhere. It's in a toothpaste commercial. It's in movies. It's everywhere. So do I necessarily need to do research? No, because the world has provided my research for me. But that experience doesn't work in the reverse. A white man trying to write a story about a protagonist who looks and kind of acts like me. You can watch my TikToks, but that's not going to necessarily tell you who I am as a person. And you have not had that organic experience to kind of be surrounded by it. you know, unless you grew up in a neighborhood surrounded by Black people, or maybe your cousin married a Black woman or whatever. And even in that case, you still need a sensitivity editor or reader, because just because your cousin's wife does something or you've seen her family do something doesn't mean that you need to put it in your book, because not everything is for everybody. And you can't be expected to know any of that, which is why, going back to what I said earlier, it's better to start a little smaller. Even if you are workshopping a main character, just trunk that book or keep it private, where it's just something maybe you share with your writing group, so that you don't feel, especially in the world we're in now, everybody is so cranky and everybody is so quick to just take this and turn it into who you are.
Yeah.
And there's not as much grace. And so that also grieves me, the idea, because I see it all the time in my comments, like, I just don't want to offend anybody. Okay, well, you probably will, because there are going to be readers who will say, what is your white behind doing writing about a Black woman anyway? There are people who feel that way, but they're not your target audience. So you have to kind of, you're not worried about the people who wouldn't like it anyway, but the people who would enjoy your plot, who want a cozy mystery, you want them to enjoy your book. So even the fact that someone was offended by it, when you read the comment, well, I just don't think you should have written a character like that. Okay, that's not the same as, it kind of bothered me that everybody else in the book was so pleasant, but every time she opened her mouth, she was complaining about something. That kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah.
That is feedback you can actually use. So even when you're looking at the other end of the feedback you get on your character of color or your marginalized character, what is the feedback actually about? If it's just a thing of, well, I just didn't like this because it's just not my cup of tea, well, that's one thing. But if it's constructive, it might be something worth thinking about the next time you write a character in this category or in another marginalized category.
That's such great insight too, because I think with you know, for me, I feel like my characters, right, they talk to me, they came to me, you know, kind of like a divine situation and stuff.
Yeah.
And so my character being a Black woman, just, it fits her. And I, you know, it just fits her, and she's so important to the story, and it just makes sense to me.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and so, like, so to me, she's got to be in there and stuff. And I deeply care about how my work affects people. The whole point of my book is to help people, even though it's a fantasy novel.
Right.
My book is meant to inspire people. It's meant to connect with people, activate people. Like, I write to change the world, like, whether that's fiction or nonfiction, right?
Yeah.
So in my head, that's what writing is about. You write to change the world, but not everybody does that. Some people just write because they're just like, oh, I have this story living rent free in my mind, and I'm just going to write it and stuff.
Yes.
But I also am one of the peoples who just really cares about how the portrayal of a character that's outside of something that I know is impacting those people who are going to see themselves in that character, right? And so bringing in as much of that authenticity and truth as I can is so vital to me. So for me, having a sensitivity reader like yourself is a no-brainer. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go through my edits and I'm sending you my book, because I want to make sure this character that I think is the most pivotal and important character in my book is done well. Granted, she's in Norse mythology, so, you know, like, she doesn't have a whole lot of the things that like the raunchy rap example, like you have, like, there's not going to be those things in the book and stuff, but nevertheless, I want to make sure she's written right and well. And
I think that's where it starts. It starts with you deciding, and this is regardless of what you're writing. Like you said, people write for all kinds of reasons. Some people write to work out their trauma. So it doesn't matter what you say, they're going to write what they want. That's your prerogative. You have the RIGHT to WRITE, whatever you want. But for people who were like, this book isn't really for me, it's for my reader, then having that perspective means they're already coming to the work with a desire to learn and to grow where they're coming from. And I think when you start there, the book improves. just because you're coming from a place of, I want to learn because I want this book to be great, not because my name is on it, but because someone is going to read this. And I want, when they read it, for, because how many of us have favorite books that they've turned to so many times when life sucks? It's because someone wrote that book. And the idea that someone could hold this in their hand and get something out of it is an amazing thing, but it's also a responsibility. And when you see it that way, it completely changes the way you approach the work.
That's fabulous. We actually just recorded an episode all about that, of the impact on fiction. Yeah. Oh my goodness. It was such a fabulous episode. Because I have a PhD in psychology. So like anything with like the character development, psychological impact is huge. And I think people tend to forget when they're writing, like even me, like with a cozy mystery, like what kind of impact does that have? It's lighthearted, it's whatever, but it does have a theme. And, you know, the one I'm writing does have a powerful theme of that self-acceptance,
Yes.
and that personal transformation and growth that my character will do in the book and across the series. And so even though it's just this whatever lighthearted book, that is going to be powerful for someone when they're reading it and they're in that spot in their life where they're like, I'm not being true to myself. And I really connect with this character because she's where I'm at right now. So I'm going to get to live vicariously through her journey. And that may inspire me to be like, you know what? I'm going to be okay with myself today. And, you know, I'm going to start to work towards the things I want and have an authentic career or relationship or whatever it is. That no matter what your story is, it has a theme and it's going to have impact on your readers.
What's so interesting and wonderful actually about well, not just fiction, but books in general, is that you never know what the thing is that's going to touch somebody else's heart. I was reading, now Toni Morrison is Toni Morrison, but I was reading her book. I was reading Jazz years ago. There was a random conversation between two people. I don't even remember what they were talking about, but something they said made me say to myself, I need to call so-and-so and we need to have a conversation because this relationship is important and there's some stuff in it that we haven't dealt with and we need to deal with it. I was in studying to finish my degree, and we're in the middle of class. I don't remember anything else about that class except reading that book and coming upon that scene, and I was stuck. Now, in the grand scheme of the story, when people are dissecting it, I don't even think that moment made the Sparks notes or the Cliffs notes or whatever. It's not going to be on a quiz. What did these two characters talk about in the kitchen? But for me, that is why that book ranks so highly in my life, because it meant something. And so I think the care with which you create the book, it infuses every line in space. So even if the big arc gets missed, there might be someone saying, you know, she came home from work and she just said, I want a cup of tea. And the world was raging all around her. And you know what? I used to like having tea when I came home from, and it's a small thing, but to that person, it's like, this is the book that reminded me to do things that give me joy. And that's why what we do matters.
Absolutely. And I just think about like some of these books that I've read, and I have a book. First thing that came to mind when you mentioned that, I have a book and I didn't even finish reading the book. And I have this section highlighted. And it literally changed my perspective on writing and what books are because of this one paragraph in this one book that I didn't even finish. That is the power of writing, and that is the power of story. It helps us to bypass the stuff because we like to put all of these things in our way. We like to, you know, but books and story are in a completely different dimension.
They cut through so much and just because they catch you off guard. Yeah. It's like a shot on goal that you just don't, and the goalie's just like, what? Because it just shoots right to the soul. And so your brain is taking a break and your heart is like, this is something we need to stop. And the brain is like, but I want to know who did it. And the heart's like, well, I'm not interested now because something is happening and we need to deal with it. And it's just such a beautiful thing, which is why it's partly why I became an editor. Actually, there was an acquaintance I met through the Twilight fandom. And which means a lot to me. I always shout them out whenever I can, because it's not just sparkly vampires and meadows. There's a real rich, diverse community of amazing, primarily women there, who have become some of the most dear people to me in the world. And one of them wrote a novel. And she said, I just don't know. She said, so many people, like, they read it and they didn't like it, but they couldn't tell me why. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, they just kept saying there was something about it. And so I said, well, send it to me. I didn't mean to do this, but I left, I kid you not, her novel was 150,000 words. I think I left 600 comments on it, because every line, I was just, and it wasn't all criticism. It was just, I'm trying to explain to you what's going on. So back to that character psychology piece, I'm like, oh, I know why people are having a problem with your book. It's not the plot necessarily. It's that you're telling us this is who this character is, but that's not who's showing up on the page.
Yes.
And so every time there was a disconnect between who she said he was and who he was, I said, now this is an example of why. In this scenario, readers would expect him to do this. He's doing this. Now, if he's going to do what's not expected, that's fine, but it has to make sense. It has to be justified, or at least the rationale has to be implied. You're acting as if this is all fine and dandy and what the reader should expect, but it's completely contrary to who you're telling us he is. So now we're thinking there's going to be a plot twist, and then we're going to understand, nope, no twist. This is just what it was. She published the book. She didn't change a thing. And that's the breaks. As an editor, it pains me when that happens, because I'm like, I'm not telling you to rewrite your book for kicks. I'm telling you that because you have an amazing premise, and you're doing it a disservice because you're not writing what you say you're going to write, and your readers are going to pick up on that. Now, they're not going to leave you 600 comments in the margin. They're just going to not finish it, or they won't buy it, which is devastating because that's a completely fixable problem. But like you said, it all goes back to, who are these characters? It's not about the different scenarios and the plot twists. Who are they? Because if I believe who they are, I'll care about what happens to them.
Yes, beautifully said. And I had recently someone I was doing a sample edit for, same thing. Like, I was reading through and I'm like, this totally doesn't make sense from what you told me about this character. I'm like, that jarred me out of the story. So like, it would be a very easy fix. Like, we'll just kind of do this little tweak. So what advice do you have for readers when they're receiving that type of feedback from an editor? Because I know it can be really hard to hear that feedback.
The first thing, and I hope this happens when you hire that editor, or I hope that's part of the decision you make to hire that person. First of all, I hope you believe that their interest is your interest. They want to make your book better. If you're getting vibes that that's not the case, then take their feedback with a grain of salt. But if you trust your editor enough to give them your book, take emotion out of it. My husband likes to say, when it comes to him at work, he said, my boss can say whatever he wants. He can use whatever language he wants to criticize my work, but he cannot speak to me any way he wants to if he's talking about me. If the editor's talking about your work, now they should be respectful. There should always be compliments. You should also be told what you're doing well. But when it comes to the things you need to change, look at the explanation. Your editor should always be explaining things. It's not enough to say, oh, you need to change Act 2. No. What do you mean I need to change Act 2? Well, this is the point in the story by which we expect to know exactly what she's looking for. We still don't know. So at this point, your reader is going, okay, if we don't figure this out, like, why am I reading this book? You have to beef up this point because the plot twist that's coming is great. But right now, the reader won't get there because the middle is a bit murky. So here are some things you can do instead. If you can see the feedback as the editor's attempt to help you tell the story you intend to tell, understanding that you do have the right to say, well, I don't want to change anything, but don't just reject it out of hand because it's a lot of work. Look at what they're asking you to do and then sit with it. Don't just, because this is a mistake a lot of people make. They get the feedback and they're like, okay, fine. And they open the document and read the feedback, put it away. At least a week, a couple is better. And then reread your book. Don't reread the feedback because the feedback is in there whether you like it or not. Reread the book. And what strikes you as, oh, I do see that. Or, now see, no, I didn't think she was right about that. I really do think this works. Now you have the perspective to actually take emotion out of it and evaluate the feedback objectively, which is only going to serve your book better.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that.
Oh, my pleasure. It's my favorite thing to talk about because I know how it feels to get feedback that you did not see coming. Yes. But being able to contextualize it from the perspective of, this is not an indictment of me as a writer. It doesn't mean I should close my laptop and never open it again. It means that was the first attempt. And now I'm going back in, and anything I do now is only going to make the book better. And if you can believe that, you can change your book in a way that you'll look at the final draft. Because I love the book I published. It's exactly what I dreamed of when I first started writing it. And I never would have gotten to that version if I hadn't gotten the feedback. And that really sobered me. It's like there's so many writers that will never know what their book could be because they won't get the feedback. So even on TikTok, talking about this it's touchy. It's not easy to have these conversations about race and diversity and representation. But if we can take some of the sting out of it and just have a little conversation about it, then now you're not feeling so awkward about saying, so is it okay to say this? And even in the asking, you're open to hearing, no, it isn't. And that's a thing that people don't often give themselves credit for. You're asking this question, which means you want an answer. Sometimes people DM me because they don't want to ask it publicly, and I don't have a problem with that. But it's also just the willingness to ask is a beautiful thing because it's all in service of the work. And that's what matters.
And that's the one thing with your content, especially, is the word I was searching for before was approachable. So much of the conversations you have makes a subject that can feel scary to talk about. It makes it feel doable, approachable, and like worth trying, instead of just not doing it, right? Because sometimes I feel like when you are a person who wants to write outside of what you know, right? Writing a character who is marginalized in some way outside of your own, it can feel like I'm so scared of fucking it up. But I also, I'm also so scared of talking to somebody about it. So it's just easier not to do it. Even though it makes sense for my story, even though it makes sense for this character, I'm afraid of offending somebody. So I'm just not going to do it. And
now it does need to be said, not to cut you off, but I will say this, and I have to say this. The thing is that not everyone from a marginalized group wants to be a tour guide for someone navigating that group for the first time.
Right.
I am uniquely, I don't want to say qualified, but it's just not a space that has ever bothered me to be in. It's never been an issue for me. I almost want to say I am unoffendable because most of the time, especially in a space like this, like I'll give you an example that actually tickled me, where I use the term characters of color a lot. So characters of color, just like you might say person with disabilities. Person with disabilities grammatically could also be disabled person. Person with autism could also be autistic person. From that grammatical perspective, characters of color or people of color should logically be colored people. But it's not, because colored is a term, obviously, that was used before. It's an archaic term for Black people. Someone in my comments said something about, I want to write colored people, and continued on. And I said, okay, I answered the question. I said, oh, and by the way, I understand that you thought colored people is shorter. Did you know how many characters you have? Colored people is shorter than people of color, but they're not interchangeable. And the person said, no, I didn't mention the characters. I just said they're not interchangeable. And the reply was, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I did that because I didn't know how many characters I had. And so I figured colored characters is fewer characters than characters of color. Now, there are some people rightfully who might just be immediately offended by that.
Mm-hmm.
But I tend to think in a space like this, you have to kind of allow a certain level of ignorance to overcome a certain level of ignorance. Now, the people, and they have been so few, the people who are just like antagonistic and, well, you know, someone asked a question, is it racist to write, it was something like, is it racist to write a Mexican character afraid of being deported or something or other? And I was answering their question genuinely. And someone said, well, it would only be racist if you didn't do it or think you couldn't do it because you're a white person and only Black people. So I just delete those because my pages are safe spaces. And if people start to feel like there's arguing and infighting in the comments, then they won't come back. And I want people to feel that they can come back because I opened this door. No one shoved me through it. And now that I'm here, I'm comfortable here. But it is important because you asked earlier, like, how do you get this feedback? I understand why you would say to yourself, well, I'm not going to go up to my, you know, Black lab partner who I've never spoken to and be like, hi, no, you know enough to know not to do that. Right. And
But
so
we hope.
Yeah.
If you didn't know, don't do that. Okay.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Because people don't want to be your tour guide. And then also sometimes I get comments, I'm going to say this delicately. People will say, well, I want to write, like in your case, Lauren, they might say, I'm writing a story and I want my main character to be a Black woman. Where should I start? Where have you started? Have you started? Because we all want a lot of things. How willing are you? It's one thing to say, I want to write this character of color or from this marginalized group or an autistic character or a deaf character or whatever, and I've come upon this issue. You can hear in the question whether or not the person has actually done any work. Just like when someone says, oh, I want to be an editor, what should I do? Well, what have you Googled anything? And that sounds like such a snarky answer, but it's not, because often they will say, well, no, I haven't. Okay, hun, why don't we start there? Because respectfully, I know more about this than you do at the moment, and I don't know where you are. Yeah. So someone asking me a more specific question, it's easier for me to answer. But if you're just coming to the page like, oh, I want to write this character and I don't know anything about her, do you have any tips for me? Yes, do some research. Because only through that will you learn, oh, you know what? Maybe I don't want to write a main character who's Black or Eritrean or Mexican or whatever. Maybe I don't want to do that yet. And honey, that is okay. You do not have to diversify your book, let alone by race, because there are other marginalized groups. There's religion, there's sexual orientation, there's gender identity, there's neurodiversity. There's so many other, I mean, my goodness, you write a woman in your book who's more than 5'5", you are doing something. You know, give your romance, if the main character in your romance is a bald, pudgy guy, but he's not lovable, you know, he's actually sexy and strong, or maybe he's not sexy, he's just a really great guy. Oh my gosh, my battery's getting ready to die on my laptop. And I charged it.
Oh,
that is all good. We're coming up on half our time anyway, so you're all good.
I'm sorry, because I don't know what to do, because this is probably going to shut off and I don't want it to.
That's right. Well, then
we will just wrap up and we could absolutely talk to you forever.
I would love to come back. That would be awesome, because we can
absolutely have part two. We'll do a part two sometime. Yes.
So we're interrupted by technology right now.
Let us know where
technology
can find you.
Yeah, tell us where we can find you. Where's all your information? How can they hire you?
So you can I have a website, proswithoutthorns.com. You can send me a message there. I'm on TikTok at Pros Without Thorns. I'm on Facebook and on IG at Pros Without Thorns. You can always send me an email through there, proswithoutthorns@gmail.com. You can email me there. I'm also on LinkedIn under my full name, which is Denise Madre, no N. And you can just find me on all the platforms. I would love to talk to you about your book, or even just book a project consultation. If you're not ready to show me your work, we can just talk about where you are. I would love to help you so you can write the book that you want to write.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we will definitely have you back. You are a gem.
Oh, we love that. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
All right, thank you. Bye. Thank you for listening. Check out the show notes for details and links from the episode. And don't forget to subscribe and follow for more. Special thanks to our composer, Micah Silverstein. Enjoy the rest of the music.